There's so many ways I could have started today's show, but there was one thing I just had to absolutely use today.
I'm in Cali with my fans getting hella lit. Hey, happy with the win today. Wait, I forgot it. Start over. Loving the support, I leave it all on the court. Fighting like a wolf. I'll be back for more, so take care and good night. Know this, the good life. Hot tubs and court time. Thursday, we back, alright?
You got to commend the guy for his bravery. Nick Kyrgios is a really funny guy. I mean, he had the best response. Take a look at this tweet from Nick Kyrgios. As much as you are an absolute gun and going to be crazy good for many, many years, this was tough to watch. My guy, El Chapo, El Rapo. Today on Coffee Break Tennis, why palace coups d'etats are bad for tennis business. We will go all the way in explaining what exactly is going on. I know it's very confusing. I spent hours and hours yesterday getting to the bottom of the president of the ATP being ousted, Chris Kermode, voted out by a faction of ATP players who are disgruntled, led by President Novak Djokovic. Roger and Rafa got involved. It has become a big story. We'll talk all about that. Also, we'll look at how the draw has shaped up. The top half of the draw is now wide open. Who do I think maybe could or perhaps should take advantage of that? And what does it mean at the bottom half with Roger and Rafa having what looks like an inevitable semifinal clash? We'll look at some of the stats from some of yesterday's matches. We'll talk a little bit about the matches that will happen today. All that and nothing more on Coffee Break Tennis. Welcome to Coffee Break Tennis, the fastest growing tennis talk show in the world. I'm your host, Matt Bradshaw. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. Comment below what you think we're doing, what you think we need to be talking about, what you think about tennis. Follow us on the Instagram at Coffee Break Tennis. Follow us on the Twitters at Coffee Break Tens. Be like Carrie Calvert. Carrie Calvert said in a comment last video that he follows me everywhere. Instagram, Twitters, of course, here on the YouTubes. Also, another thing Carrie Calvert said was, I didn't realize it was him on Instagram. He said, of course, Felix Auger-Aliassime will lose to some scrub in the next match after taking down Tsitsipas. He clarified that. Thanks for mentioning my comment, scrub, as in outside of the top 50. And, yeah, Carrie Calvert was right. But it was a good match. Auger-Aliassime, he came back in the end, made it a tiebreaker after, I think he was down 5-1. I tuned out. I saw him break back for 5-2, and I turned it off. I came back eventually. Anyways, we have breaking news this morning. This is from The Guardian, Kevin Mitchell, editorializing, sharing his opinions of what Tennis Channel vice president and one of the three, by the way, if you're confused about how the ATP functions, who's on the board, what is the player council, how do they work, we'll talk about it today. We'll get into all of that. I'll explain all the stuff that was confusing me yesterday. And I want to apologize for not doing a show yesterday. I meant to do a show previewing Wawrinka and Federer's match, which was a pretty awesome match for Fed heads. But as I saw, and many of you have commented below and tweeted me and Instagrammed me saying, Matt, please talk about this drama that's unfolding with the ATP council, the player council, the getting rid of President Chris Kermode, Roger and Rafa, all that stuff. Roger and Rafa versus Djokovic is what most people are really interested in. So I realized yesterday that I would have to do my homework and really know what I was talking about, understand how the ATP functions, not as far as how the tennis goes, but as far as how they run it. They have a board. It's chaired by half of tournament directors, people that represent the people that run the tournaments, and three guys that run and three guys that represent the players, and then Djokovic, of course, leads the player council. Anyways, we'll talk about that a little bit later. First, let's talk about what one of the three guys who voted no to Chris Kermode, the guy who's going to be gone at the end of this year now, that Roger and Rafa, they like him so much because they think he's done a great job. And honestly, prize money for players, if this is what the big gripe is with the player council, that they're not getting enough money, and honestly, you know, at the lower levels of tennis, it's true. It's a struggle. I get it. There's not that much money when you factor in how much you have to pay for your hotel and your airplane to travel the world and play on the what used to be called ATP World Tour before they thought that name was no longer in vogue. So David Edges, however the heck you say it, he's the vice president. He's friends with Justin Gimelstabenbergler. And then this guy, Alex Inglot, he's a lawyer. His brother is a doubles player. David Edges, because Justin Gimelstob can't come out and say it. He came out with an email late last night basically saying, I'm so befuddled by all this media coverage and the negativity, and if Roger and Rafa, and I don't even think he names them, he just says, if great icons of our sport want to be involved, then I invite them to take part in the political process. It was, it was very much like that. So let's go through Kevin Mitchell, writer at The Guardian. Pretty much all these tennis journalists are very anti this whole thing. They side with Roger and Rafa. I didn't want to side with Roger and Rafa right away, which is why I spent literally 8 hours researching how players' unions have affected other sports like the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball. This is why I spent so much time trying to understand how it works in ATP. And again, let's just go through what's new. 3 players' representatives, David Edgies, Justin Gimelstobenbergler, Alex Inglot, who have spread bewilderment in tennis by effecting a palace coup few previously knew they wanted, are complaining now that their noble cause has been misrepresented. Apparently they are carrying out the will of the people, but the 10 people on the Players' Council, an inner cabinet claiming to speak on behalf of their supposedly downtrodden members, want their sport back. Edgies, who helped Kermode's downfall, says the media have misrepresented their cause. In prefacing his email with this haughty sentence here, David Edgies says, there will be no further comments on this matter. So he's basically saying, I get the final say, here's the final word, this is what happened. Edgies is surprised at the amount of coverage dedicated to this internal governance decision, saying, it has been disappointing to see the divisions and suspicions that have been stoked in that coverage. All members of the Player Council, including 10 current players, as well as the 3-player board representatives, meaning himself, Justin Gimelstobenbergler, and some British lawyer who has a brother who plays doubles, have spent months discussing and debating the merits and concerns with renewing Chris's contract. Chris Kermode, president of the ATP. Basically, he's the guy because you got 3 people who represent tournaments, and then you got 3 people who represent players. Their votes are everything. When they are tied 3-3, President Chris Kermode, he cast the deciding vote. This is what Djokovic said in his press conference, if you caught it, when he first came to Indian Wells, saying he doesn't like it and he wants to reform the whole system because they don't like that this guy, the president, the CEO, whatever he is, Chris Kermode, often sides with the tournaments. We should not minimize their commitment and sacrifice after consulting across the game. Well done for doing your job. It is worth adding at this point that we have heard in recent days that some of our greatest icons, Roger, Rafa, Stanislav the Stanislav Wawrinka, are interested in re-entering the political conversations and helping us in the council guide the next phase of the sport's growth. This is fantastic news, and all of us welcome them and their unique perspectives. Again, the whole, we welcome you to participate in the political process. And Kevin Mitchell points out here, which is a good point, what David Edgies doesn't say is how Novak Djokovic or anyone else on the Player Council did not have time to talk to these icons, Roger, Rafa in particular, before such a crucial vote. Federer pulled the carpet out from under Djokovic on Tuesday when he revealed, I tried to meet with Novak on the deadline, says Roger. Unfortunately, he had no time. That's hard to understand for me. It's okay. He certainly had a lot to do with the whole story. Shortly after that, Djokovic loses to Philip Kohlschreiber. So they got to point out that, they're enjoying it, that Djokovic is getting it. Now, this is where it gets a little bit rich, especially for people who are critical of this whole situation. David Edgies says, the Player Council, in consultation with the player board representatives, meaning the 3 people that vote, meaning himself, he talks about himself like he's not one of the people, and Gimelstobenbergler, who's in hiding, who's actually, today's Mittwoch? Yeah, today's Wednesday. That means Justin Gimelstobenbergler is in court right now because there's charges that during trick-or-treating, he assaulted some venture capitalist guy, striking him, quote, 50 times in the face, saying, quote, I will kill you. Which, again, I'm with John Isner on that one. Innocent until proven guilty. But, geez Louise. Sorry, I got off track. So back to the Player Council in consultation with the player board representatives, meaning him, Gimelstobenbergler, and some British lawyer who has a brother who plays doubles, were best placed to make the decision on behalf of the player membership. To be clear, this is not a decision made or driven by 1 or 2 individuals' personal beliefs or agendas. But maybe you could argue it was made by 3 individuals, not 1 or 2. So it's not entirely untrue what he's saying there, but a bit rich, especially for the people who don't like this whole thing. Mr. Guardian says, of course not. It was, as he says, the decision of himself, Gimelstob, and Inglot. As Rick and the young ones used to say, it wasn't me, it was the other 3. I don't know what the young ones are, but I'm sure if you know what that is, it's a very funny line. Yeah! That's how you get contact above. If you're struggling with your serve, make contact with your arm all the way up. Just telling you what tennis teaching guru and genius Peter Freeman of Crunch Time Coaching, our head sponsor here, would tell you. Waffle House coffee in there today. It's not as good as what I usually have. So that is the latest news. But what is this whole story? You've heard it all over, I'm sure. There is a coup going on at the top of the leadership of tennis. Now Herr Peter Bodo over at the ESPN, been covering tennis forever, this guy, he put out a piece, and sometimes I'm a little critical of his piece. You know, heck, I'm critical of all these tennis journalists, but I'm kind of agreeing with most of them that I've seen. And Herr Peter Bodo wrote a good piece just kind of explaining the basics. So we're going to look at that in just a moment. But first, let me remind you, remember in 2018, the very beginning of the year, there was this like ATP board members, players, you know, all the high ups, but mainly I'm guessing like the top 100 players, all of them were there. Basically everyone who was playing in the Australian Open at the start of 2018, there was this big meeting. And then at the end of the meeting, in the Daily Mail, as far as I can tell, we're the first to break this story, so let's take a look at that. Anyway, so there was this big meeting, and Novak Djokovic asks everyone who's not a player on tour to get out of the room. And everyone's kind of shocked, like, what's going on? Are we all about to get, are we safe? And so they leave the room, and Djokovic basically makes this pitch that we need to blow up the system. We need to make, and of course, this story died shortly after because Djokovic was asked about it, and he said, that's not true. I don't like the way you guys are reporting this in the media. It's mostly lies and made up what you've said. And then that was it. We didn't really hear about it. They asked Rafa about it, and he said, for me, there's much to focus on now. We have much time to talk about this at the end of the season. For me, I am focusing on the tennis. Right? So the story kind of died there. But what was reported widely, and Viktor Troicki, friend of Djokovic, Serbian tennis player known for being kind of crazy, he kind of let the cat out of the bag and basically said what happened. But Djokovic makes his pitch that we should start our own players' union, blow up the system as it is, demand more from the majors and the tournaments, more money, and then he brings up a union lawyer who makes his pitch that we can form a union and strike at next year's Australian Open because here in Australia, the way the laws are set up, again, in my boring research yesterday, I read a lot about antitrust laws, which I have more questions than when I started now. But basically, this guy was saying it's easiest here in Australia, the way the laws are set up, to do this here. It would be harder if we did it at, say, the U.S. Open, where U.S. antitrust laws make it pretty much impossible, or at least there would just be tons of lawsuits. It'd be insanity. And I'm guessing European law is similar enough to where it's easiest in the Australian Open, is what he was saying, basically. And then the story kind of died, but then it came back later in the year when they got rid of, remember Roger Rashid, the guy who he was working with Grigor Dimitrov for a while before Danny Valverdue was there, and he had a lot of emphasis on getting Dimitrov more fit. He was saying, once Dimitrov gets super fit, super strong, I'm going to work him out like crazy, then he's going to start beating everyone. Didn't exactly work like that, but overall, I'm sure it was a good experience for Dimitrov getting in better shape with the guy. Roger Rashid was one of these three people that represent the players on the council. And after he voted for a 1-year only increase on prize money, I think it went up 5%, 6%, something like that at all the tournaments, the player council said, we don't want to vote on that. We want to vote on something that lasts forever, that gets bigger and bigger every year. And basically, President Chris Kermode is like, hey, dude, that's not going to happen. So it's either this or nothing. So Roger Rashid went along with the vote and got it approved, got them the pay increase. Sounds like a good thing. Djokovic reportedly furious, the people on his faction on the player council furious, and they voted to get him kicked off. And he was kicked off. He said nothing about it. That's when it was demonstrated that Djokovic and his guys will take you out if you don't go along with what they're trying to do here. So I remember this story, but I kind of lost interest in it. Like I said, it kind of died. I thought, okay, that's kind of crazy. It sounds like a lot of these players aren't cool with it. Nothing's going to come of it. And then, of course, I got focused on Roger Federer's title defense, where I predicted he would win a 20th major, and of course, he did. So let's go over Herr Peter Bodo, and if you're bored by this, I'm sorry. I know, I didn't want to get into this, but a lot of people asked about it, and it's just become a bigger and bigger story. And then, of course, the news today where I don't know, how do we characterize it? Again, I'm sorry if this is very boring, but we have to go through this. Then we'll talk about tennis. And the rest of the week, we won't talk about this unless something significant breaks. So Herr Peter Bodo put this on ESPN.com. I'll link to it in the bottom if you want to check all of it out. But Basically, he does a Q&A. Why is Chris Kermode, the ATP president, in the crosshairs? The main decision-making body of the ATP World Tour is the board of directors, which consists of 3 player representatives, that being Justin Gimelstabenbergler, some British lawyer, and David Egge's vice president, Tennis Channel guy. 3 tournament representatives who basically the tournament directors from around the world, I don't know if they get together and vote, but somehow they decide on these guys representing their collective interests. And an executive chairman and president, Chris Kermode. The president casts a deciding vote on any issue when the vote is deadlocked 3-3. The disgruntled players basically feel Kermode sides too often with the tournament reps and their desires. What did Kermode achieve? What did this guy do? What's the big deal? Why do Roger and Rafa like him? Why does Djokovic not like him? This is where it gets tricky and controversial. Prize money in tennis has more than doubled on Kermode's watch. That does sound pretty good. Attendance has soared. Kermode was the prime mover behind the successful Next Gen tournament in Milan. It's okay. I like it all right. I'll never forget the first edition when they had the exotic ladies walk the players down an aisle and then remove a piece of clothing. Remember that? He was responsible for the tournament. I don't think he's responsible for that. The new ATP Cup in partnership with Tennis Australia. This we haven't seen yet. That's from next year. Who knows if that's a success. The ATP World Tour Finals in London's O2 Arena. Massive success. Those are some of the reasons why Nadal told BBC, I personally believe Chris did a good job. But what does the anti-Kermode camp want? Basically, more money and more job opportunities for more players. Djokovic has taken up the cause, and this is a theory we'll see around the media. Djokovic has taken up the cause of the journeyman. Kermode is accused by some of not doing enough to improve prize money distribution for the rank and file, low-ranking players. Djokovic, who is, and again, you'll see this a lot, they kind of attack Djokovic and which looks shady in itself. A lot of these journalists kind of discredit him by saying, Djokovic, why do you want more prize money when you've already made $129 million? Djokovic, who has personally salted away nearly $129 million, has taken up the cause of the journeyman. So that's kind of poking at, are you taking up the cause of the journeyman? Or do you just want to line your pockets more? I don't know. Maybe he is. There's a more interesting, of all places, Simon Briggs has a pretty interesting theory on that. And in a now famous leaked email earlier this year, Vasek Popsicle, best known as a Wimbledon doubles champion with Yak Sock, exhorted his fellow journeymen to, quote, start acting and running like a business, not like a bunch of scared kids. We need a CEO that first and foremost represents our interests, which Stan Wawrinka had a response that everyone saw. It was kind of like he wrote back to a big group email and said, reply all. We'll get to that in a moment. By the way, I just want to point out that email, which goes to show you what Roger and Rafa is saying, is that like this was kind of hidden from them. No one talked to them. Federer even goes as far as to say that Djokovic kind of avoided him. The suspicious thing to me is Popsicle only sent that to players ranked 50 to 100. It's like he didn't want the higher ranked players that have more sway to get involved. He wants to appeal to these guys that make less money because maybe you can make a rift between the highest echelon of the sport. And I know 50 to 100, they're still doing all right. But again, they're not doing as good as Roger Federer. They're not doing as well as top 10 players, top 50 players in general. So I think that was kind of interesting in itself. Is there really a rift among players? Asked Bodo. On this issue, there certainly appears to be, and it highlights a constant fact of tennis life. The interests of the best players are not necessarily the same as those of the lower-ranked brethren, and prize money isn't the whole of it. Stars like Federer, Nadal, Wawrinka feel that they carry the tour. Who's going to buy a ticket to a tournament where Popsicle is the top seed? Most of the elites feel Kermode is doing a good job. Djokovic is the outlier. Is he trying to do the right thing or positioning himself as a political figure in an attempt to distinguish himself from the two men who have always overshadowed him? That's basically the Simon Briggs theory. Then he talks about unions. Why don't they make I kind of talked about this earlier, but I'll just read what he said. Why don't the players create a union like the NFL? In order to form a union, at least by the U.S. law, the prospective members must be employees. Their bid must be officially approved by the National Labor Relations Board because a union is exempt from federal antitrust laws. Tennis players, however, are not employees. They're independent contractors that go around the world on the tour to different tournaments. Those groups cannot strike if they have a monopoly in their field, as the ATP and WTA do, because doing so would violate antitrust laws that can't be replaced by scabs. All right, so there you go. What did Stan Wawrinka say to that email from Popsicle? In all caps, Wawrinka wrote, you need to look at the current direction, last 5 years, and accept it is good. It's moving in the right direction. You cannot be sure it will be better which is implying under a new ATP president. One page for one sentence. Don't worry, Mr. Goat will recycle it at some point. So here's the real story. The players are very divided over this stuff. And why shouldn't they be? Like I said at the beginning of the show, I spent so much time reading about players' unions in different sports. And like I said earlier as well, I have more questions than when I started. It's confusing, overwhelming, complex, lots of stuff. I'm not an antitrust law specialist lawyer like Mr. Inglot, some British lawyer. But I'll tell you one thing I gathered from reading all these stories about these different players' unions and the histories of how they've happened. Some of this stuff started in the 50s, I think, with basketball. There were a lot of strikes, and there were a lot of lockouts. Lockouts, my best example, I think this is 1982 with the NFL, if I'm correct. Again, I read so much, it all blurs together at this point. But it doesn't matter. Let's just say, for the sake of the argument, it was 1982 with the NFL, and the players have this players union that's trying to get them more money, and then the NFL says, you know what? We're going to do a lockout. You threaten to strike? Screw you. We'll make you on permanent strike. You're out. We're canceling football. There's no games. There's no paychecks. You can't go to the facilities and work out. You can't do anything with your job. Just sit there and starve. And of course, lower-ranked players in tennis would really be affected by this. Players that weren't big stars in football were definitely affected by this. And eventually, the players turned on their own union and said, stop, just give them what they want. We need our paychecks. Get us back in the game. None of this stuff would be good for tennis if it were to somehow happen. I don't know if antitrust laws would prevent it from happening. I don't know if Djokovic and what he said last year could really happen. Could you imagine the players striking at the Australian Open? And again, if Djokovic really led a strike with some lower-ranked players, do you think Roger and Rafa would do it? Or do you think they'd be like, oh, we don't have to play Djokovic? We have a weaker field? Let's go win. I don't know if it even works that way. Maybe they'd have to cancel the tournament. None of this stuff, though, I know for sure, sounds like it's very good for tennis, especially at a time, as Rafa pointed out, where they have to renegotiate the contract for the ATP Nitto Suito World Tour Finals at the end of the year in the London O2 Arena. That tournament can just disappear if they don't lock it down. That's a bad time to have someone new coming in. Another thing Rafa points out is when you got a new person coming on board, they got to make a team. They got to get up to speed on all the issues. They got to build their relationships with all the people they're going to have to work with. And as Rafa said, that is a lot of time not spent improving the sport. And as far as he's concerned, that's the bottom line on this. I tend to agree with Rafa. Let's look at a little bit about Roger and Rafa said about this, and then we'll be done with all this stuff. And of course, please comment below, especially if you're an antitrust lawyer or a union lawyer. Explain more to me about it. I tried to meet Novak on the deadline before the meeting, said Federer, speaking in Swiss German, which I had the Swiss German earlier. I actually was reading it pretty well in the voice. Unfortunately, he had no time. That's hard to understand for me. And basically what Roger says in the bottom here, what Rafa says as well, I think, I've pretty much covered what Rafa says. What Roger and Rafa basically say, what Roger's saying is, we want to know why. Bring us in. Roger, of course, pulled the rug out from under Djokovic and said, Djokovic didn't try to contact me. I said, let's talk. He said, I'm too busy. It's hard for me to understand. Roger says, we just want to know, what's your plan, dude? And a lot of people around the media are saying the same thing, even if they like it. Old John Wertheimlenbergler over at, he's at Tennis Channel, of course, and he's a Sports Illustrated writer. He was saying that he likes unions and hopes this, just play the clip. Take a listen for yourself.
People are calling it a palace coup, but as I see it, Novak wants change, whether he has someone else in mind or whether he wants to blow up the system. He's talked before about unionization. I personally think that's a great idea. I think the current tour structure is really outdated. So I think unionization makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of this owes to the flaws of the tour's structure.
Where is it going? That's what he wants to know. That's what Roger and Rafa want to know. Of course, they don't like the idea of a players' union. I don't think they agree with Wertheim on that. But they want to know, what is the plan, Djokovic? You got rid of this guy. We thought he was good. Who's the next guy? What are you guys trying to do? And what Djokovic said, which basically goes back to last year where he's talking about a union and all that. What he said in the media, even though he tried to not talk about it at all, was they need to change the way the whole system works because the president is the tie-breaking vote in a 3-versus-3 vote all the time. We just spent so much time on that. I'm not going to do the stuff from Simon Briggs. He basically said Djokovic is so overshadowed by Roger and Rafa's legacy, he'll never be GOAT, even if he wins more majors. He didn't say that, but, some people will never, ever give Djokovic GOAT status, even if he had 30 majors. which is not going to happen. And he basically said, oh, so Djokovic just wants to be the great man of the people who fought for the rights of the low-ranked players. And Roger and Rafa's belief is basically, if you win everything, you can get a lot of money. And if you're not winning and you're not selling tickets, like what's his name said, who wants to see the number one seed be Mr. Popsicle? Certainly not me. So, last night, we saw an incredible match. Roger and Stanislav, the Manislav Wawrinka. I was very nervous about this match. Many of you may know if you followed me on the Twitters, I talked about it a little. Of course, Roger had a 21-3 head-to-head record. Maybe that's why Roger was so confident and so aggressive and just constantly applying pressure and looking pretty fearless. We've seen matches in the last year where Roger Federer looks nervous, uncomfortable, unsure of himself. Is it because he had a hand injury? Is it because he got scared at times? I don't know. He certainly didn't look anything like that. And again, maybe, is it the head-to-head record? Stan wasn't playing bad. Not at all. Roger was pretty unbelievable. Another thing about Nadal, I just want to point out, sure, he did beat down City on Diego Schwartzman. 81% win on first, 69 in second, 63% in, so Rafa's hitting those numbers. But I just want to talk about, look who's coming up next. Khachanov. John Isner. John Isner put up better numbers than Khachanov on serving. 64% first serve in, 87 win on first, 82 win on second. Broke serve 3 times. John Isner's forehand looked great. John Isner was moving well. John Isner is working on that insurance. Because remember, he won Miami last year, and I think he lost first round at Indian Wells last year. So Isner just needs to go as far as he can and rack up some points in case disaster strikes at Miami. Imagine if he'll at least... If he could at least get to the quarterfinals or even the semifinals here, that would be some nice points to help deduct from whatever he loses, assuming that he's not going to win the Miami Masters 1000 2 years back-to-back. Khachanov, on the other hand, Khachanov, 55% first serve in. First serve win, 70. Second serve win, 47. Just looking at those numbers alone, and he played Andrei Rublev, who I believe got in as a lucky loser, who's really been struggling. Just looking at those numbers alone, I would tend to say that John Isner's serving and playing a little better, so he'll come through, and we could get Rafa and Isner. Remember Isner beating Djokovic here. Rafa loves this high-bouncing court, and it's going really well with the forehand. It won't bother Isner. It'll sit up for now. Do I think Isner will beat Rafa? I don't know. It's a tough call. But remember, Isner came real close to beating Rafa at the French Open that one year. We'll never forget. I can't remember what year, but we'll never forget that match. Isner is the kind of game that can bother, especially on grass at Wimbledon, but can bother Rafa anywhere you go, even as we saw one time at the French Open. It could definitely happen here because the court is fast enough where Isner can really hit a lot of serves. That another thing, Craig O'Shaughnessy was showing us that when Rafa gets the serve back, the first serve, he wins half the time. Same with Djokovic and Federer. More than half the time, I think, for Rafa, especially on clay. Isner is a guy who can pop in a bunch of serves that Rafa will not put back on play. He won't get to enjoy that stat that helps him so much. And his forehand, his biggest weapon, is not going to be as effective against John Isner. I know Isner's not the greatest mover. Maybe Rafa can exploit him that way with the forehand. But the height of the ball, which sometimes when things get tough for Rafa, he just rolls loopy, high, deep balls, gives him time to get back in position, gives him time to, get back in the point. That won't be effective against Isner. In fact, Isner might like that height and that might sit right in his wheelhouse, and you might see him punishing some of those. So watch out for that. Novak Djokovic stats, really bad. 42% on second serve, 66 in, 68 win on first. So we look at this draw, and things are very interesting now. This top half of the draw is wide open. Too bad Auger Aliassime couldn't have won because this could have been his breakthrough. He could have got to the He could have got to the final. So we got at the top. Now, Kohlschreiber, which, again, Nick Kyrgios had another funny tweet. He said, when I lose to Kohlschreiber, it's the end of the world. When Djokovic loses, you guys have all these excuses. Why do you got to kiss these guys' butts every time they lose? And Kyrgios said, maybe Kohlschreiber is just good. Maybe he's just good and he knows how to win. And I would argue Kohlschreiber might not know how to win against the big three all the time, but Kohlschreiber has proven to be one of these guys that he just knows how to consistently find ways to beat the various characters that you face on the ATP Tour. Players, Kohlschreiber's been beating these guys forever. So Kohlschreiber versus Monfils, who looking good. Monfils has been looking good. He's looking even better now. Ivo Karlovic and Dominic Thiem. Dominic Thiem, what an opportunity for him. He appears to like the court. He has a ball that explodes and bounces very well. This court's slower, so he has time to set up with his big loopy strokes. This would be a great time for him to come back and do something. Can he beat Ivo Karlovic, though? That's a guy who's going to make it hard for you to get in a lot of points with that serve. So Dominic Thiem will have to be very disciplined with his serve. So who would I see coming through there? I'm going to go with, I've always liked Kohlschreiber probably because of the one-handed backhand. But Monfils has been on fire. It's too hard to call. Let's say Dominic Thiem and Monfils gets through there. You might go with Dominic Thiem at that point. But, this is a new Monfils. He's in love. He's a new man. Maybe he'll come through to the semifinals. Then you got Jan-Lennard Struffy-Struff, who beat the heck out of Sasha Zverev. If you didn't see that, that was shocking. But I have it under good authority from an inside secret source at Indian Wells. I can't say who. I can't say how I know any of this. But I'll tell you this for sure. Sasha, pretty sick, not feeling well for several days. So let's not go too hard on the guy for that result. Still don't like the attitude from Sasha. Even if you're feeling sick, it's not like when Michael Jordan was sick. Not at all. Milos Raonic should come through Jan-Lennard Struffy-Struff, who was playing well, but not the greatest mover. Raonic a better mover. Raonic should be able to exploit it. Nishioka beat Auger Aliassime, who's lightning fast, plays Kekmanovic. I've never seen the guy play, just like I haven't seen Hubert Hurkacz. Never seen him play either. You got to say Milos Raonic and Dominic Thiem. Or Kohlschreiber. Monfils, any of these guys can get through here. I don't really know enough about Nishioka and Kekmanovic to say it with confidence, but Ivo, with that serve, anything's possible. It bounces so high here. Milos Raonic, Dominic Thiem, Monfils, Kohlschreiber, these guys have had good results for so long. We know Monfils has had a lot of disappointing results over the years, but he's had plenty of good ones. Any of those guys should be able to take advantage. I'd have to go, of course, the most with Raonic and Dominic Thiem, who are, they've done more than the other guys. Then in the bottom half of the draw, where all the interest lies. Hurkacz, Shapo, El Rapo, Shapo. Kyle Edmund, who's a good player, but Federer has to feel pretty decent about that. Shapo, things look really good for Roger, especially after the way you would say none of these guys is more of a threat than Stan Wawrinka. Stan's been pretty good lately. Again, I don't know enough about Hurkacz to say for sure. Isner, Khachanov, and Krajinovic and Nadal, we already talked about that. I like Isner to come through there. Krajinovic is a good player. If you'll remember last year, he lost here badly. I think couple breadsticks or something like that. Federer beat him down last year. I'll never forget that because I remember how shocked I was when later in the indoor season, I think it was maybe Basel, Shanghai, somewhere like that, fast indoor court, Krajinovic almost beat Roger. It was a very nervous match. All right, so that's enough of the draw. All right, well, that's it for us. Thank you for watching Coffee Break Tennis today. So much going on in the world of tennis right now. Of course, comment below what you think. We'll try to do, actually, I don't think we'll be able to do Beer Hall Freitag, which I love to do when there's a big tournament. But Beer Hall Freitag, where we break out the beers and we go through lots and lots of comments. We'll try to sneak it in. Maybe we'll turn it into Beer Hall Donnerstag or Beer Hall Samstag. Do you like where things are going here? Who do you think will get through? It's a tough call. As we're wrapping up the show today, I just want to say Filip Krajinovic and Rafa Nadal are about to take the stage. It's not impossible for some disaster to strike like we saw for Djokovic, but the way this court's playing and the fact that Krajinovic is not 6'10", I think Rafa's probably going to come through, and I feel pretty good about Roger Federer as well. See ya!